Hi there, everyone. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here today in such an esteemed crowd and to have your ear, to talk not just about today or tomorrow, but about the far future as well. First, let's talk about humans. So, we all want to not only get by, but we aspire to do a little better. In this case, we've got some folks who are pretty aspirational. In this case, it didn't work so well, and it kind of might have ended up where you're kind of at the very lowest end of the sort of aspiration chart. But we do want to have it meet at least our basic needs, right? We want to meet our basic needs of food, shelter, and clothing. But it shouldn't end there. We want to do better. We want to have security of our property, of ourselves, and so on. And ultimately, we want to hit what we all aspire to with self-actualization. And my very favorite example of self-actualization is Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, in his younger years, he was a publisher. To sell more publications, he actually wrote books. He was the author of The Farmer's Almanac. And not only that, he had trouble with reading and so on, so he invented the bifocals. Along the way, he invented the Franklin stove so that you wouldn't have smoke all over your apartment. And then, he kind of retired from that and became a scientist, and he basically took electricity from a notion of a mystery and turned it into a science, and he connected lightning with electricity. And, you might think that's enough to end your career, right? Pretty good so far. But in the twilight of his career, he co-invented the United States of America. So pretty good, right? So if you want an example of self-actualization, Benjamin Franklin is the man. Not only that, he actually wrote the very first book, or arguably, on self-improvement. Excellent book. So we might all know about Maslow's hierarchy, everything from the basic needs of physiological food all the way up to self-actualization. I took a bit of liberty and added to the bottom the not surviving part, Darwin Awards, if you will, like the scene before. And of course, this is the barely getting by, and we all want to be like Ben. That's why we're here in this room, talking about it as individuals and maybe as corporations and beyond. So that's setting the stage partly, but there's a couple more stages that I want to set before I proceed. First of all, let's talk about tokens. And you might think, what are tokens? Well, I'll tell some stories. 2 years ago, a 20-year-old boy, basically, started a nonprofit. It had no product. It raised $20 million on the basis of a white paper, an idea. Now, 2 years later, it's a $30 billion ecosystem. Investors made 1,000x. This is something called Ethereum, and it's actually quite a remarkable thing. Some other examples, just a few months ago, a startup, once again, no product, no customers, no real IP, 5 employees. They raised money on a $300 million valuation. A week later, it was worth $3.5 billion. This is an organization called Gnosis. You might ask, what's going on? And by the way, this is just 2 examples. There are dozens. There's another token launch every 2 or 3 or 4 days now, right? Raising 50 million, 100, and more. Well, it started with Bitcoin. Almost 10 years ago now, some like to call it magic internet money. It really was quite a remarkable thing. For the first time ever, human civilization got e-gold, electronic gold, on a ledger that no one owned or controlled. So it's better than gold in some ways. But since that was almost 10 years ago, it has evolved, and it has evolved with these things, like you saw, with Ethereum, with Gnosis, and dozens, in fact hundreds of other blockchain systems. So what's happened now is there's this thing called the ICO, Initial Coin Offering, or token launch. And what happens is you raise money at the very beginning of the project, not unlike a seed in a startup, but it's for tokens in this network or ecosystem, not necessarily shares. And everyone, of course, wants the value of this to go up. So the community collectively owns these shares, and they are actually trying to raise. So the community, which is the shareholders, is working together to raise the value of this ecosystem. It's kind of a common good, actually, that kind of reconciles the corporation with the startup, with the nonprofit. And it's also interesting, tokens are liquid immediately on these crypto exchanges, which means you have exit on day one. Normally, if you're an investor, you have to wait 5 years or 10 years, the length of the LP fund. Here, you have exit immediately. So the liquidity is 10,000x. And that's why there is a lot of money flowing in. So you can frame this as an IPO, but crowdfunded. You can frame it as Kickstarter, but for real assets or real securities. Or you can call it venture capital investing for the masses. But this is a thing. It's a real thing. And here in Germany, in the world, blockchain investment has been more than 1 billion this year. And the vast majority of that has been via these ICOs. So I've set the stage in a couple ways. Maslow's hierarchy, tokens. Let's talk a bit about civilization. There's some worries. Many people brought them up today. First of all, climate change, right? We could have, we have global warming, and that could cause severe issues as we go along. Nuclear war, right? We thought we were past this in the Cold War, but we've got some new leaders that are a little troubling at times, right? And not only in the USA, in North Korea and otherwise, right? Asteroid strikes. You might think, oh, this will never happen in a million years. Well, this is actually the prevailing theory of why the dinosaurs went extinct. If this happens to our planet, we're done for, right? And that is really a problem. Or there was multiple mentions today of AIs taking jobs, right? Here's some AI-controlled robots taking some manufacturing jobs, right? And you might think, oh, well, I'm safe because I'm creative, I'm an artist, or I'm a businessman. Well, I did my PhD on creative AI 10 years ago. This field of creative AI has been around for decades. Those jobs are going away too, right? Just this year, for example, singing synthesis is a possibility. So you think you're safe with your creative job? No. Probably, my view is, the safest job of all is that of AI researcher, and everything else could be gone, right? So you might think overall, how does this all work, right? And with these worries we have of barely getting by, if you think about it, we're all trying to just avoid disaster, right? We're all basically thinking about civilization in Maslow's hierarchy terms at the very lowest level. Surviving, feeding ourselves and so on, right? But there's another way to think about it. What if we were to aspire to be the Ben Franklins as a civilization, right? Together, collectively, for this common good. What would that look like? How would that feel, right? So I'm going to take the next part of my talk to explore this a bit more. What does self-actualization of civilization actually mean? Does it mean TED Talks for all? We can all talk about self-actualization and pat ourselves on the back. Maybe. Or maybe it's about exploring the cosmos, right? Not just Earth and Mars, but beyond, to Alpha Centauri and beyond. And quite honestly, it's really whatever you make it, right? Just as an individual, maybe I want to, do something in science, or maybe I want to do something in a corporation and so on. So we all can have our own definition of what it means for civilization to self-actualize, right? And really, you could think of it as not only a destination, but a journey. So not just life's a journey, but civilization's a journey, not a destination. So let's talk about some of the recent developments we've had, just to kind of give a flavor of where we've come from, right? Well, in the last couple decades, we've had a shared planetary network. That's the internet. On the left here, we've got Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, who invented this in the 70s. And on the right, this is a shared interplanetary document. It's literally one giant document that we call the World Wide Web, or Web. And that's Tim Berners-Lee, a little younger then. And these are quite profound technologies, right? They have influenced society like crazy. And this was just a few decades ago. We have virtual reality. This is actually a 90-year-old grandmother checking it out. There's a video on YouTube. It's wonderful. We have augmented reality. Augmented reality is getting more real these days, right? With things like Microsoft HoloLens and beyond. This is the next iPhone as well. Big data, right? There was a recent article in The Economist about how the new oil is data, and the companies that have amassed much wealth in the last decade are the companies that have the data. Facebook, Google, Uber, and otherwise. And not only do they have data, but they have figured out how to connect that data to dollars. How? With AI, deep learning. So basically, the raw material is the data, but then modern AI technology, deep learning, is a necessary tool to convert that data to knowledge, to insights. In the case of Facebook and Google, to selling more ads and making more money. But it's this combination of having not only the data, but also the AI expertise, which has enabled this. So deep learning is actually a significant advance for AI because it allows people to attack much harder problems with actually similar algorithms that we had even in the early 60s. So these are some recent advances that we've had with civilization. Pretty cool, right? Some big changes. Let's think about what next, right? In the idea of self-actualization of civilization, what might come next? What might we aspire to? And there's a lot of great ideas out there, so I looked around and mined around, and I'm going to show a few. So it's not just about the very top, but it's working up the whole hierarchy, right? So the Gates Foundation it has done an incredible job actually helping in Africa and otherwise with helping clean drinking water, waterless toilets, solving malaria, solving tuberculosis, things that other organizations weren't focusing on as much. It was really things that Africa needed, right? So the Gates Foundation, they really just said, we're going to focus on the physiological needs, getting past the not surviving to the at least getting by. And then others have thought about, well, how do we get higher up, right? So with AI, right, if AI really does take 99% of the jobs, does that mean we can't feed our families? Well, one of the proposals is universal basic income, right? And this is actually a wonderful proposal because it means that even if AI does take all the jobs, we can still feed our families, right? And I like the framing that Albert Wenger gives, another good German, who talks about UBI in the context of AI. It's probably the most cohesive framing I've seen. Even going higher up, right? The famous economist Hernando de Soto talked about if you want to help people rise out of poverty, then you need to give them title to their land. If you're a poor family in a favela in Brazil, then if you give them title to that favela, they can take a loan, they can start a business, they can climb out. The challenge in a lot of countries is no one trusts the land title registry. This is where companies like BenBen are coming along, using blockchain technology and actually implementing trustworthy land registries that aren't dependent on the government. So this is actually going higher up, in this case, for security of your personal property. I'll keep going. These are things, some of these things are coming along now, right? Brain-computer interfaces. People have been using this since the 80s to actually type with, right? You might think it's very sci-fi. They do keep getting better and better. Here's a person using EEG to type. And to give you a feel where this can head, once we combine brain-computer interfaces, EEGs or otherwise, with augmented reality goggles, then we can basically have SMing, silent messaging, where you're texting by thinking about it. Right? Remember, I just showed you a slide where you can already type by thinking about it. Now you just put this on goggles and you're thinking subtitles to each other. This is pragmatic telepathy. This is actually possible with today's technology, and there are prototypes out there. And I showed the next evolution here where you can not only have it as goggles, but you can have it as contact lens. And actually, people have been researching this since the mid-90s, going for FDA approval. So contact lens that overtake the role of the goggles. I've also talked already about Bitcoin. This is actually a new development for society. It allows a planetary e-gold, right? You can move around this store of value with very low friction. And it didn't end with Bitcoin. There's been many developments since, and three core pieces of the infrastructure are a shared planetary file system to store large data blobs, for example, IPFS, a shared planetary database for metadata about what artist created what songs and so on. That's IPDB. That's my day job, basically. And Ethereum, this is the shared planetary processing. So think like computer viruses, but good ones, with wallets attached. So these things are happening, and these are advances for civilization. This is new core internet infrastructure. Just like the World Wide Web built on the internet, these things here are building on the World Wide Web. Let's talk about space. So going back to the Ansari X Prize of the early 2000s, we had a winner with Spaceship One. Here's a picture. So this is actually a solution to low cost to space. However, it's pretty low orbit. Well, we prefer to have low cost to useful space, and this is actually only finally possible in the last year with the work of SpaceX, where you can actually have reusable rockets. And that was actually the biggest cost, was the fact that rockets would be thrown away. Imagine every time you flew back and forth between Berlin and Salzburg, they threw away the plane, right? Your plane ticket would probably cost, $1 million, right? And this is actually how space was until recently. So this is a significant advance for humanity. And beyond that, we can get even cheaper. We can have space elevators, where basically it's a super, super long, strong string from Earth to a satellite that's orbiting, right? Right now, we're not quite there because it's actually a really hard materials science problem, but we're getting there. And of course, for civilization, we are very interested in getting to Mars. First of all, with one person, but then 1,000, and then 1,000,000, and eventually so many people that it really can be independent from Earth. So if there is an asteroid strike on Earth, then civilization will survive. And of course, we want to get back and forth between Earth and Mars cheaply. So how do you do that? You could use rocket thrusters and so on, but it turns out that if you choose just the right trajectory, then what you can do is fall to Earth from Mars with gravity. And then you can loop around Earth and slingshot back to Mars. And then you fall back and forth, gravity the whole way. And I'm very proud, my brother, the rocket scientist, his name is Troy, he discovered a whole family of these trajectories to go back and forth from Earth to Mars. And I'm very proud because this is actually super low cost travel. It's the world's lowest cost between Mars and Earth. So gravity assist cyclers. Keeping going, right? If we want to keep going beyond, we want to do asteroid mining. Why? This gives us energy in space. So as we're building things, there's tons and tons of minerals and so on out there, but to get at them, we actually have to mine asteroids. And you might think, oh, well, that's crazy. There are 2 or 3 highly credible companies out there right now pursuing this as a real business, right? These are trillion-dollar business opportunities. And beyond, right? So why stop at Mars? What about exploring the cosmos? Now, there's a hitch. You might think, we've got Earth, we've got Mars, and beyond that, though, the next closest planet is Proxima Centauri. It's 4 light years away, but at maximum speeds of today's travel flights, it will take 81,000 years. Oops. So, and Charlie Stross, the sci-fi author, I love this quote. He says, "Sending canned primates was never going to end happily," right? We're basically primates in tin cans flying around the cosmos. So taking 81,000 years to get there is probably not going to work. So I could expand this slide into a whole talk, and I have before, but there is a lot of reason to see, can we migrate our minds into a better substrate, right? My view is, as humans, it's not about my body, it's about my mind, my patterns of thought that are in my brain and my body and how they're manifested, right? And then, once we have that, we can explore the cosmos. And there's at least 2 credible ways. There's uploads, and this is a question of brain scanning that gets higher and higher resolution over time. And then a bandwidth plus scenario. Think like iPhone 25. Once we go beyond the smartphones where we're talking with texting, we can keep going. So there are some credible ways to get here. It's nothing in the next 5 years, but 20, 30, 50 years from now, 100, this is where we could be heading. And this is great because what it means is we can explore the cosmos. And oh, by the way, if AI ever does wake up, that's okay, because now we have a competitive substrate. But why stop with exploring the cosmos? Why not reshape the cosmos, right? Like, expand your mind. What's the biggest, craziest thing that civilization could possibly do? And I wish I thought of these things myself, but I really have to credit the sci-fi writers like Charlie Stross. So once again, Charlie, he wrote, "Dismantle the moon, dismantle Mars, build masses of free-flying nanocomputing, Matryoshka brains, Russian doll Dyson spheres, the size of solar systems," right? So we really can create and change the cosmos, bending it to our will if we choose. This is one possible goal. It doesn't have to be. It's all up to us as we go forward in the future. We don't have to decide today or tomorrow. This is just a possible future for civilization. So I've talked a lot about ideas, right? Everything from the now with shared planetary databases all the way to reshaping the cosmos itself, right? How do we organize these, right? I mean, if we try reshaping the cosmos tomorrow, it's not going to work, right? Well, who here has played Civilization, the video game? Anyone? 80s, 90s, Sid Meier, all that? So there's video game Civilization, and there's newer ones as well when you play real-time strategy games. And they have what are called technology trees. And what it is, basically, you start out and you invent fire. And if you don't invent fire, then you lose the game, right? But once you invent fire, then you invent the wheel. And then you invent a few more things. You invent the steam engine. You invent steel. And bit by bit, you take your civilization farther and farther. And it's all organized in this technology tree, or more precisely, a technology graph. And that's what we have here, a technology graph, literally from a screenshot from the game. This is the 5th version of the game. The first version was a little more pixely. But imagine if we took this for civilization itself, right? So I talked about reducing poverty, right? And the goal is, imagine that 99% of people on the planet can eat, right? What does it take to get there? There's a bunch of things, right? Clean drinking water for all, waterless toilets, solving malaria, solving TB, a whole bunch of other things, right? And that's really just for the lowest level. One level up, it's things like trustworthy land titles. Once we get past a few of these, we get to that level where 99% of the population of the planet can eat, right? And I'm not claiming to have all the answers to this. This is just a starting point, right? These are just ideas. In this case, largely inspired by the work of the Gates Foundation. There was a mention earlier of the UN has 17 objectives or goals. We can populate all of those onto here as well. Or the challenge of AI, right? If AI takes all of our jobs, so then the 99% suddenly have no income again, and then the 99% can't eat, right? Oops, that's no good. So, so in this overall graph, in this overall framing, what we can have then is we go post capita with UBI. So suddenly, the 99% can eat again, right? So this is a very useful thing, and it's crucial then. We're actually in a race to get UBI or some other way to get this before the 99% don't have income, right? Because otherwise, we could have major societal upheaval, and that would be no fun for anyone. Here's the graph for a shared planetary computer. And, early days, we had the internet, the web, we got Bitcoin, which really, to generalize, was blockchain. And that is unlocking a whole bunch of new technologies, like a shared planetary database, file system, and so on. Overall, you can think of it as a shared planetary computer. And this is a key substrate for some of the future steps. So for future steps, I talked about having a new substrate for the mind, right? Well, if you want to have a substrate for the mind, do you want to host it on Amazon? Probably not, right? You probably don't want to be reliant on Jeff Bezos pulling the plug, or Elon or anyone, right? You really need something that's out there that no single entity owns or controls. And so to get there, there's actually a whole bunch of steps, right? We've got VR, and then from VR, we've got simple AR, and then fancy AR with silent messaging, the telepathy, all of this. Eventually, where we can have the bandwidth where we talk to computers faster than we can talk to ourselves, right? There's the idea of a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Well, imagine if I can think pictures back and forth to other people, right? And that keeps going more and more and more, and eventually that would lead to a new mind substrate, right? Or the independence from another planet, right? So how do we get to Mars not dependent on Earth, right? So that if an asteroid comes along, where civilization is okay. Well, we start off with basic spaceflight, and then we can say maybe this low cost to low orbit space. Turns out that's a technology dead end. It's not useful at all, right? And this is why Virgin Galactic and so on it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme, right? But keeping going, there's other ways. We need to have asteroid mining. We need to have super low cost, and we need to start civilizing Mars, right? When we have these things, we will actually have Mars not dependent on Earth. In terms of exploring the cosmos, I'm taking some of the inputs from before, the mind, substrate, energy in space with asteroid mining, super low cost with space elevators. All of these together can lead to exploring the cosmos, right? This is a way, way cheaper to get there. And then from that, eventually reshaping the cosmos, right? And inside here, you can unpack these. These are really big steps. So overall, if you take all these graphs that I had one slide at a time and you put them all together, this is what you could call a civilization graph, right? And this is just a starting point, right? I don't have most of the ideas, but what you could do is you crowdsource this, right? You put this out there onto the internet, onto this shared document substrate, and you let other people contribute, right? You crowdsource this. So we have all these graphs and dependencies among things to eventually exploring the cosmos and reshaping, and who knows what's beyond that, right? Maybe we have some way to avoid the heat death of the universe. That would be cool. But this is basically a graph, and I like to call it simply the map, right? So you might think, well, this is all great, Trent, great. Cool ideas, kind of crazy, but it would be wonderful if we could achieve that. And you might ask how? Well, how are these big ideas normally funded, right? Wikipedia has simply donors, and then they build, right? Or you can have get donors and then give prizes, and that actually turns out to be a 10x lever on the money. And this is what X Prize Foundation has done, for example, for the Spaceship One, and they're doing it with 10 other things like lunar landing and so on. Or you can do things like make a lot of money, become a billionaire, and then give most of it back, right? Like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is doing. Elon Musk is doing, and more, right? That's pretty cool. And actually, that was one of my motivations myself. Like, hey, can I get super rich so that I can give it all away, right? But I've been asking myself, is there another way? Do I need to get super rich first? Is there some other way? And there's a problem so far. What we had so far, this is only tapping into a very small community. It's not mostly the people who are getting benefited. And it's a relatively small money because it's all donations, right? It's a money sink. It's not an investment opportunity, right? So if it was an investment opportunity, a lot more money could flow. And it's only covering the next step, right? So if we have this overall civilization graph here, the green parts are being covered, but the red, the stuff that's 2 steps, 3 steps out, isn't, right? So people don't have the context of what they're funding. It's only the first step. This is where tokens come back, right? Remember the beginning of my talk? I talked about tokens and blockchains. Well, so you can think of tokenized ecosystems literally as public utilities, right? A shared infrastructure for file storage and for databases and so on. So far, it's only been for internet infrastructure, like eGold, for bits, right? But it could also be about atoms, right? There's nothing stopping us from tokenizing Hyperloop for Europe, crowdfunding a Hyperloop for Europe, crowdfunding asteroid mining. And you might think, that doesn't make any sense, that's a bit crazy. Guess what? I'm in talks with people about literally token launching asteroid mining, right? It's a real thing. And there's a few reasons why it's very beneficial. Partly, it's an investment opportunity. I'll get into that in a sec. So how do we use that in the map, right? If we have this idea of tokens as public utilities, as helping the common good, what does that look like? How do we do it? Well, imagine we have this map online that people can explore, add ideas. But now imagine every single point on that map has a Bitcoin address. And with that Bitcoin address, it's super easy for people to donate to. So I'll put in 10 euros, someone else puts in 1,000, someone else says, hey, this is a great idea, I'll put in 1 million, right? Once you get past a certain threshold, say $5 million, a team gets assembled and actually goes for it to do a full-on token launch and so on. So launch a company, launch an ecosystem, right? So around clean drinking water, waterless toilets, and so on. This, by the way, this is a Bitcoin address, and it's basically this string of like 30 characters that looks random, but literally, that's a real Bitcoin address. So if any of you wanted, you could take a photo and send money to that. It's not mine. I was kicking myself earlier. I really should have put my address up there, and then maybe some of you would donate to my food tonight. But anyway, this is the summary here, basically where to fund the map, each node can accept donations with a Bitcoin address, and then once you get enough money, you can literally launch a tokenized ecosystem around that. And you can do it for the whole map, right? So if people are really interested in saying, hey, I want to reshape the cosmos, great. It might be a while before your money comes back there, your investment there, right? So I would probably recommend doing the earlier stuff, but if someone wants to be excited, that's great. And here's the amazing thing, right? This is maybe the key slide. Tokens fund the self-actualization of civilization. Isn't that cool? So to dive into that, it's tapping into the community that wants the advance, right? It's significant because it's actually an investment opportunity. You could put money into this and maybe get 10x, maybe 1,000x, right? Imagine if you put money into TCP/IP in the 70s. You would probably make a lot of money from that, or Ethereum 2 years ago. And it prioritizes, at least partly with money. You don't want it to be just money-based priorities, but that helps, right? Even the faraway things, people can vote with dollars, right? And it's easy to tell where the money leads because you have the context of this graph. So, to wrap up, the map helps civilization self-actualize with 2 parts. It's got a crowdsourced idea graph. So online, you've got this graph, people are contributing. I gave you the first cut there, and it's funded by tokens. Tokens like Ethereum or Bitcoin and beyond, right? And this is really interesting because it not only addresses things like climate and jobs and AI, it leads us to exploring and reshaping the cosmos. Thank you.